Welcome to the webinar, Top 10 Diet Tips for Better Diabetes Management. This presentation was put together for our Berkshire Health Group Diabetes Care Program, our BMC Wellness at Work program, and for anyone who's dealing with diabetes or pre-diabetes, including supporting family members. I'll introduce myself as Lisa Laramie. I'm an RN, a certified diabetes self-management education specialist, a certified health and wellness coach, and I'm the manager of BMC's Diabetes Education Services and BHS's Wellness Department. Did you know that most chronic diseases are more of a matter of lifestyle than genetics? Understanding the role that everyday habits play, such as how much you move, how you eat, sleep, how much you manage your emotions, your environment, even your personal connections. These everyday habits have a great impact on your health, and they influence your longevity and your quality of life. That being said, how we eat is more important than ever. So today, I'm happy to bring you some of my favorite nutrition tips. As much as there's great medical care out there to support you with your diabetes management, most of your success is self-driven. Choosing the right foods can be the most powerful thing you can do to control your diabetes and take care of your health. So looking at the first slide, this is the ever important question that many of us find ourselves asking. What should I eat? It's forever confusing, controversial, and stressful. There are more diets and quick fix plans out there than ever before. All approaches have their pros and cons, whether you're talking about health effects, maybe your blood sugar, again, blood pressure, looking at controlling your cholesterol, or maybe you're more concerned about cost or convenience, or even most importantly, taste. If it doesn't taste good, we're probably not going to eat it. So instead of giving you a specific eating plan today, I'm going to provide some general strategies that I've learned keep blood sugars in range. They also improve energy. They're relatively convenient, and they fit within most budgets. These strategies are for everyone, whether you're type 1, type 2, pre-diabetic, or even those without a diagnosis of diabetes. These strategies will help people of all walks of life achieve a healthy weight and improve their health. These 10 strategies are in no particular order, and you don't need to follow all of them to get results. Let's look at our first tip, carbohydrates, as one of the keys to controlling diabetes and weight. So tip number 1, I like to advise, and this is a general rule of thumb for folks, so it may not work for everyone, but in general, try to limit your carbohydrates to 30 grams or less per meal. So let's talk about carbs a little bit first. We love carbs. These are things you're all familiar with. They're breads, they're grains, starches, veggies, fruits, beans, and pretty much anything made with sugar. And there's 4 concepts I'm going to share with you to help you. But the main rule of thumb, again, is to limit these carb servings at all meals to 30 grams or less. And these 4 points we're going to elaborate on a little bit more. So let's first focus on the why. Let's talk about carbs a little bit and how to count them. So with carbohydrates in your blood sugar, let's first just tell the little story of how carbs work. Think of them as sugars. And when you eat carbs, they're broken down into simple sugars. These sugars enter your bloodstream, and about 90 to 100% of these carbohydrates or energy source sugars enter the bloodstream maybe in 20 to 90 minutes after eating. Now, with certain types of carbs, the refined carbohydrates or processed carbohydrates, just know that they enter the bloodstream very rapidly and they may spike your blood sugar. And as your blood sugar levels rise, your pancreas is going to release a little hormone called insulin that you've probably heard of. And this hormone prompts your cells to absorb sugar from the blood. Now, our blood sugar rises in type 2 diabetes when your muscle and other cells can't accept the insulin and the glucose. Why can't they accept it? Because they're already full of glucose. You're already full of energy that you haven't burned yet. So in type 2 diabetes, this is called insulin resistance. And it causes blood sugar and insulin levels to stay high long after you're eating. Over time, your body will try to make more insulin to handle the heavy load of glucose. But when it can't keep up, this may be because your pancreas is no longer able to function normally, and insulin production reduces, or in some cases, it eventually stops. Now, talking about type 1 diabetes, it's a little different story. The blood sugar rises in this case because the pancreas doesn't produce enough or any insulin to get sugar into your cells. Carbs impact the amount of injected insulin you need to manage the carb load in your food. Okay, so a little different story. But eating too many carbs or refined carbs, again, those processed white foods that we'll elaborate on a little bit later, they cause big spikes in blood sugar, again, because they enter the bloodstream really quickly. And this causes insulin resistance, which worsens diabetes. And not only that, but it makes us tired and hungry. It wipes out our pancreas, it beats up our liver, it causes us to increase our body fat storage, all things we don't really want happening. So again, what I want you to remember mainly out of this story is that insulin and fat storage go hand in hand, and a high carb diet uses more insulin. So you can kind of see where the connections are. And again, as another way you can think about this with carbohydrates, and different carbohydrates are going to have different effects, and we'll talk about those. There's good carbs, and then there's ones that are not as good for you. But about 1 gram of carb is going to raise your blood sugar levels maybe 3 to 4 milligrams per deciliter on average for most folks. You might be a little bit different, but that helps you to kind of estimate if you're going to eat something, what the effect might be. And on my little graphic here, you can kind of see that we get into this ugly cycle. So again, the story that I just told you, you can see it all starts with a high carb diet. High carbs, again, spike that blood sugar when they're refined or processed. And that's going to make our body push out a lot more insulin. And again, remember, insulin leads to both fat storage and it leads to insulin resistance when we're already full of sugar from high carb diet. That again is going to turn into unfortunately that cycle of being fatigued and hungry when our blood sugar levels aren't stable. And that causes us again to want to reach for the carbs to re-energize ourselves. So we get ourselves stuck in this cycle, but you don't have to be. So I'm going to give you some tips today to get you out of this cycle. So not all carbs are created equal. So I have some graphics for you to look at here, some examples. Do you notice, without even me elaborating on anything here, do you notice a volume difference in some of the plates that you can see? If you look at the plates that are over on the left-hand side, this shows 20 grams of carbohydrates in high carb foods versus low carb foods. And definitely can see a difference. You can see that certain low carb foods, the plates are overflowing. And in some of the more dense, again, refined, these are more processed foods, you can see bagels, rice, pasta. That same 20 grams is a much smaller portion. So again, if you don't like dealing with tiny serving sizes, foods that are high carb sources are going to give you an empty looking plate. On the right hand side, you can see some other examples. So these are all 15 grams of carbohydrates. So this would be 1 serving of carb. And you can again see that there's definitely a difference between them. You could have a whole cup of soup, which is going to be nice and satisfying here. It looks like a minestrone on the bottom. Or you could have half an English muffin. Which one would be more satisfying to you and make you feel more full? Same with looking at that baked potato. You could really only eat a quarter of that baked potato for the same blood sugar impact from those carbohydrates as you could, again, an entire half cup of oatmeal, because we'll talk about this a little more in the nutrient difference with the different types of carbs. So again, just remember that if we're choosing lower carb foods, we get to fill up our plate more. So this example here just shows you different carbohydrate servings in different food groups. So grains and starchy veggies, you can see, have more carbs than proteins and dairy. Some nutrients on here, like the fats and the lean meats, have no carbs at all. So fats will not really raise your blood sugar very much, and proteins have less of an impact unless you eat them in a really high quantity. So that tells us to diversify our plates a little bit, right? That we can have room for carbohydrates alongside fats, healthy fats, and proteins, and really fill ourselves up without spiking our blood sugar. So this next slide is going to teach us how to be carb detectives. When we're choosing packaged foods, labels can really help us be carb detectives. And one thing I do want to mention as a helpful resource for you alongside is certain apps can also really help take some of the guesswork out of this. One of the apps that I really like to recommend is called Fooducate. It's a free app. It's spelled Fooducate. And this app has all the nutrition facts built right in, so you can look up any food. Even foods that don't come with nutrition labels, like something in the produce department, an apple, for example, doesn't have a food label, but FoodJK will tell you how many carbs are in it. It also has a scanning feature. So instead of doing some of this label reading, which I'm about to teach you, you certainly can just go in, scan a barcode on any food in the supermarket. It's kind of fun. And the app will come up with its nutrition fact information, let you know how many grams of carbohydrate is in it, and will also give you a rating. So kind of like a school rating, whether it's an A, B, or C. And lastly, and very nicely on this app, it also gives you some healthier alternatives. So you can look elsewhere on the shelf to maybe find a better food if it doesn't give it such a good grade. So moving into the label reading, if you want to learn how to read labels, which I think is really important, there's a lot of really confusing information on a label, but there's also some really helpful stuff that I think you're going to need to navigate whether a food is a good choice for you. So carb counting can really seem overwhelming at first, but again, it's not difficult whether you want to use an app or follow a couple steps that I'm about to teach you. So we'll look at this in 2 steps. The number one thing to always look at the very top of the label is step 1 is let's look at the serving size. It does always matter how much we're eating. So for this example, we're looking at 15 crackers. So if 15 crackers is enough for you, then you can certainly proceed down the label and the numbers that are below are going to be accurate. If you're eating more than 15 crackers or less, we're going to either divide or multiply. So in this example, if we had 2 servings of crackers, which would be 30, then we would be looking at the total grams of carbohydrates below, not as 21 grams, but as 42 grams. The next thing that we really want to be able to focus on, which is very important with glucose or blood sugar management, is the fiber. Fiber really is one of the most important things to look at besides carbohydrate grams on a label, because it really helps your blood sugar. And not only that, but fiber helps a lot of other things. It helps with digestion. So we tend to have better digestive health, prevents colon cancers, also helps reduce your cholesterol. And it also helps produce a really healthy gut biome. That's the bacteria in your stomach that really help you digest and control a lot of your organ functions. So just know that foods with lots of fiber really do make your gut bacteria function a lot more healthy. So looking at the fiber, we can see in this example that these crackers happen to have 4 grams of fiber. Not too bad. A lot of them, if they're white crackers that have been refined, have no fiber. So look for the crackers with the fiber. And the reason is that they have a lessening effect on the blood sugar. So with the carbs here being 21 grams, if 4 of them are fiber, we're going to subtract the number of grams of fiber from the number of grams of carbohydrate to end up with something called net carbs. And in this case, our net carb number is 17. That means that only 17 grams of this carbohydrate source are going to have an impact on your blood sugar. So hearkening back to me in the beginning slide saying that we should really limit foods to 30 grams, when you find foods that have a little bit of fiber hidden in them, your net carbs actually end up being a little bit lower. So it means we can eat a little bit more, like I showed you on that volume plate, right? You're starting to get the gist of this. So moving on to the next step, not only do we get to subtract fiber, but we also get to subtract something called sugar alcohols. Now, sugar alcohols are not in every food. They're mostly in processed foods that are dietary sweets, we'll call them. So they might be in protein bars, shakes, sugar-free candies, ice cream, things that are, again, a little bit sweetened. And they tend to go by certain names that end in OL, and I'll show you that on the next slide and give you some examples like maltitol, erythritol. But these sugar alcohols also have just a slight effect on blood sugar as compared to regular table sugar. So what you're going to do again is you're going to look for the total number of grams of carbohydrate. Again, multiply that by any additional servings that you might consume. You're going to subtract any fiber that might be in the food. And in this example, I don't think we see any fiber in the sugar-free candy bar. So what we're going to do is we're going to get to look down to the sugar alcohol line. And this will always be listed underneath sugars. And it's not the same as, don't get to subtract your sugars, but your sugar alcohols. So what you get to do in this case is you divide the number of grams of sugar alcohol by 2, because what we feel is that they still have some effect on your blood sugar, but only half as much. So in this case, if we have 18 grams of sugar alcohol, we're going to get to subtract 9 grams from the total grams of carbohydrate. So we have 29 grams in our candy bar. We have 18 grams of sugar alcohol. We're subtracting half of that is 9. So our total net carbohydrate in this case is going to be 20 grams. So that's kind of nice. And if there was fiber in this product, you would get to subtract that as well. So not such a bad little math equation there. I think it's really, really helpful. And again, just to kind of reiterate, we can say that net carbs is, again, total carbs minus fiber minus sugar alcohols divided by 2. So moving on to this next slide, I'm going to give you guys some examples of some sugar alcohols. So again, you can see that it's a lot of different sugar additives that end in OL. Some of them I think are better than others. Anything you see that says hydrogenated, I would steer clear of. But mannitol, xylitol, sorbitol, erythritol, these are all very common foods. What I will say is that as much as they give you that little break from that blood sugar impact, half as much as sugar, and they'll give you that little sweetness for your sweet tooth craving, you really want to eat these sparingly. They do cause some bloating and digestive upset in some folks. So if you overeat these, you might regret it. But in normal quantity, if you eat a normal portion, they can belong in your diet and they can keep you from feeling like you're too deprived of ice cream, for example. So I've put up a product that I think is fabulous. It's called Rebel Ice Cream. I'm not affiliated with them at all. I'm just a fan. And they have a wonderful product that is only 1 gram of net carbs. And again, you can see on the label if we go through this, if you were to stick to a half a cup serving for this vanilla ice cream here, it has a little bit of fiber in there, so 10 grams. You're subtracting 2 grams, so we're down to 8. And then we're going to subtract out the sugar alcohols, which is at least half, and that brings us right on down to really negligible amount. That's where they're pulling the 1 gram of net carbs. Now, I will say there's lots of different options for people with net carbs to find what works for you. So some people might actually not subtract any of them. They might, really start to say, I'm going to just take the whole amount of carbohydrate. And I'm gonna, just assume that it's gonna have that impact for me. You really have to find the right amount that works for you. Same with fiber. I think it's a general rule of thumb to say that people should be able to subtract the full amount of grams of fiber, but for some folks, they might only subtract 50% of fibers or less. You're gonna have to do a little bit of trial and error to find the amount that's right for you. But again, the equation that I gave, I think is gonna be pretty straightforward and simple to start with. So moving on to tip number 2, eat your veggies. I'm sure your mom said that when you were a kid, and it's a really, really good tip. I do have to say, sometimes the simple ones are the best. I will say that, not all produce is created equal. So vegetables are naturally wonderful sources of carbohydrate. They also contain some proteins and some fats, so there is a little bit of a combination within certain vegetables, but they're mostly carbohydrate. There's varying amounts of carbs based on the type of vegetable. So what I would say is, for a lower effect on your blood sugar, eat more of what grows above the ground. That's more of our leafy produce. So our spinach, our broccolis, cruciferous vegetables, tomatoes. These tend to be, again, a lot lower glycemic. They still have all the wonderful fiber. Your starchy veggies, however, are going to have a little bit more cost. They have a little bit more natural sugar in them. Now, I'm not advising that anybody limit starchy veggies to the point where you're thinking that carrots are bad for you. But we do want to just control the portions a little bit and reach more to volumize our plate with the leafy ones. Always remember that fiber is your friend. As I was telling you before, you get to subtract it from your carbohydrate impact on your blood sugar. It also, again, has all those wonderful qualities I mentioned before in terms of general health. It makes you feel full. And I would say, if you want the most nutrition from your fiber, to eat the skin if you can. That actually contains even more phytonutrients than the inside of the vegetable, because what protects the veggie from the elements also is going to protect you. And it has most fiber in the skin. And lastly, I'll say raw whole veggies are the best. They are going to have the lowest glycemic effect because we haven't prepared them, so your body has to work harder to digest. But if you do have any digestive issues where it makes it a little bit hard for you to eat raw veggies, cooking can certainly help you digest and give you all the same wonderful benefits. You'll still get the fiber, you'll still get the good nutrition from them. So not all veggies are created equal. As I mentioned, there's ones that grow above the ground, there's ones that grow below the ground. And you can see in this top graphic here, this goes all the way from 0 grams of net carbs to 6 grams of net carbs, all very low amounts, right? You can imagine if you get 30 grams in a plate, you could still really fill it up pretty nicely here with a lot of this type of produce. But you can see that the things that grow above the ground, like celery, bok choy, cauliflower, cabbage, these all have very, very low carb numbers of net carbs. And as we move to the bottom slide, these are our starchy veggies. Again, full of wonderful nutrition. They certainly belong on your plate. You just need to control your portions a little bit. So you can see yams as an example. They have 32 grams of net carbohydrate. So if you were to have a serving of yam on your plate, I would say the rest of the plate should be filled with proteins or leafy vegetables or other things just to balance it out a little bit. All good nutrition. So tip number 3, choose whole foods. This one I can't stress enough. There's nothing magical about whole foods. They're basically foods without all the fancy packaging and processing and flavoring that we've done to them before they got to the supermarket. This is what our great-great-grandparents ate right off the farms. So foods as they occur in nature. The reason that we want to eat whole foods is because, again, they have not been processed. We haven't removed the good stuff. So they contain the most fiber and the most nutrients, and the most health benefits for your body. They're going to keep you full and energized a lot longer. And, you know, I would say, because we're creatures of the supermarket, we're not always going to only shop in the produce department. And I do understand you might want to venture into some of the aisles. So certain packaged foods can still make the cut. If you pick up a packaged food and you flip it over and you look at the ingredient list on the back, we can still consider it to be a mostly whole food if it has 5 ingredients or less, and it doesn't contain large quantities of added fats, sugars, or salts. Okay, so 5 ingredients or less still makes the cut. So I just gave a little graphic here just to inspire you a little bit. Whole foods are absolutely beautiful. They catch our eye, and we're naturally drawn to them because they're part of our biology. Our body recognizes all of these things as food. And when your body has the most recognition of these types of nutrients, it makes the most of them. So really, your health does come from what you eat. So moving on to tip number 4, avoid, this is the flip side, refined carbohydrates. So on one slide, I'm telling you to eat whole foods. Now I'm telling you what not to eat, which is the processed stuff. So we do know that the more something has already been processed or manufactured, they've basically already pre-digested it for you. If you think about, I'll give a really extreme example of a chicken McNugget from McDonald's. That type of chicken has already been mechanically separated and broken down. So that type of a protein acts very differently than a natural piece of chicken. We're talking proteins here. So when we move into the carbohydrates, it gets to be even more interesting story. So if we take something that was a whole grain and we strip away the bran and all of the fiber sources to it, we process it, and then we add sugar and we turn it into Cocoa Puffs or Rice Krispies, it has a very different effect on your body than that original whole grain did, right? There's very little to slow down and make your body work to digest because the food company's already done it for you. So again, this quick digestion causes a spike in your blood sugar. So sugar comes in many different forms in this way. Sugar I'm referring to synonymously as a refined carbohydrate because it's already broken down before you even eat it. So this is candy, it's white bread, it's rice, pasta, potatoes, crackers, chips, fried foods. These foods, again, they're delicious and they do belong in the diet in moderation, but know that if you're eating a lot of this type of food, it's really hard to control portions. The idea of willpower, it's really almost impossible because with lots of the added fat, sugar, and salt that companies are putting into this, they've really engineered this food to really trigger your cravings, and it makes you just want more and more and more. So avoiding them will get you out of that cycle. So here's another slide that elaborates a little bit on the differences with processed food. And they go anywhere from unprocessed, which is the whole foods. These are the ones, as I mentioned, that occur, as they are in nature, have the most nutrition. Then there's the processed foods. So these are the ones where we're going to get out our little detective eye and we're going to look at that paragraph. Remember I said 5 ingredients or less? So this could be canned food, frozen food, things that have been preserved. Some of them still have some good essential nutrients. But again, be careful when they start putting additives in, mainly that fat, sugar, and salt that makes us crave. And then lastly, the ones to absolutely avoid is the ultra processed stuff. So this is foods that contain, really little nutrition. There's pretty much no fiber left in there. And they're usually sourced from corn, soy, or wheat. So really, again, a lot of processed food sources with lots of extra fat and flavorings. Not so good for your body or your blood sugar. So moving on to tip number 5. This is a really simple one, but it's probably one of the most important tips to really switch over your beverages to plain water, seltzer, or unsweetened tea. And I'll back up, I shouldn't have said plain, because water, in and of itself is absolutely the ultimate thing we're meant to run on, but you can jazz up your water a little bit. So if you feel like drinking plain water is going to be boring, beyond boring, think about adding some fruit essence to your water, sliced cucumbers, or you could put in some mint, or anything, that little bit of lemon squeeze, anything that really makes it a little bit more interesting to you. They make a great product called True Lemon that's powdered. So if you don't have access to fresh fruit, you can find that where a lot of the healthier beverage options are in the supermarket. It's portable, you can keep it at your desk in your purse. I would say that if you're reaching for a product, a beverage product, always read the label. You want to check and see to make sure that, if it does have some sort of a sweetener, that we're not consuming any artificial sweeteners like aspartame or NutraSweet. Splenda's a little controversial. I would say if you do need to have something that's a little bit sweetened because you're weaning yourself off of colas and juices, try to go with a product that has stevia. That one is a little bit more on the safe side in terms of studies that they've conducted so far, but it does still trigger the sweet tooth. And over time, I will say, if you start to cut down on the amount of sweetness that you put into your foods and your beverages, you will get used to it. I know if you're in the beginning of this that you're probably saying that's not true, but sugar is a learned taste. And last but not least, whatever you choose to drink throughout the day and really make sure that you're properly hydrated. Now that differs for everyone. The 64 ounces a day some people talk about, that may be appropriate for you, it may not. It depends on your energy demands and your other food sources throughout the day. But trying to at least sip on some water, again, unsweetened tea, flavored seltzer is great throughout the day. It's going to really help you to have more energy and improve your body functions. Moving on to tip number 6. This slide is probably not everybody's favorite, but I think since the world has changed in this past year, we have started cooking a little bit more, not being able to go out to restaurants as often. So thinking about being a cook really does put you in the driver's seat. It's going to ensure that you can choose your own quality ingredients as opposed to letting a food company choose them for you. And it can certainly save you a lot of money. We pay a lot for the convenience factor. So if you're willing to spend a little bit of time to whip a few ingredients together, that's certainly going to save your wallet. And home cooked meals, we know don't have all those additives in them. We don't add extra salt and sugar and chemicals and preservatives to our own foods. So you're already winning by not having that stuff added onto your plate. Now, you don't have to be a chef in order to cook. Just a simple cookbook to inspire you might do the trick. I have a great one that's 5 ingredients. So each meal takes about 15 minutes to put together, which is fabulous if you're working or busy with your kids. Websites can be wonderful sources of information. I really like dietdoctor.com, which is a specific website for low carb eating. They have lots of recipes, again, not really elaborate, complex ones. And I will say on the next slide, if I haven't convinced you to cook, there is one other option. You could certainly look at some of these meal delivery programs that they have on the market today. These come with either pre-prepared meals that you just heat up, or they come with these little recipe cards and ingredient bundles that you can make in about 30 minutes or less. The one that I am showing here is Green Chef, which I believe is similar to like a Blue Apron, but it's an organic company. And I really like Green Chef because they offer some low carb meal plans as well as vegetarian and other types. So you can get out there, check out some of these meal plans. They're not as cost effective, but they are eco-friendly. They do cost a little bit less energy in terms of the shipping that would have been required to get the food to the supermarket. So if you're a green, environmentally thought-conscious person, I just wanted to throw that out there as well. So moving to tip number 7, for all of our snackers out there, my tip for you is it's okay to snack, but choose to snack well. Let's really be conscious of our snack choices by really reaching for things like nuts and seeds and nut butters, which are incredibly low carb and very filling. They keep us energized. Fruits and veggies are always a slam dunk. I know a lot of diabetics are told not to eat fruit, but fruit with the natural fiber included can still be a wonderful, healthy snack choice. Lean proteins as well, thinking about a rolled up piece of turkey or some string cheese. Even the grass-fed beef jerkies can be a decent snack choice. Nuts, hard-boiled eggs, these are all wonderful lean proteins. Think about things that are go-to snacks that you can bring with you that are portable, because oftentimes if we let ourselves get really, really hungry before dinner, we start to make some bad choices. So think about things that are portable. Having a little package of nuts in your purse is never a bad idea. I think another tip that I'll give you is avoid the seafood diet. So try to keep junk food out of your house. It has nothing to do with fish. But if you see it, you'll eat it. And I know a lot of us have kids, so we do need to still stock some snacks, but try to keep them out of sight. So I tend to keep a designated cabinet in my house where I know there's some, extra things in there that I might not personally want in my diet, but at least it's not staring me in the face every time I walk in the kitchen. The last little tip I'll give you that I think is helpful for most people is to try to shut down snacking about 90 minutes before your bedtime. Now, if you're somebody with diabetes that has a medication regime where your primary care or your endocrinologist has suggested that you have an evening snack to level out your blood sugar with your medication, this tip may not work for you. But the types of snacks that I'm suggesting, again, you can talk with your physician and they can hopefully work with you to incorporate some of these better choices into your evening and your day. So here's some examples of some low carbohydrate snacks. Some of the things that I already mentioned, like nuts can be fabulous. Knowing that almonds and dry roasted items are a little bit better than like honey roasted with added sugar. Avocados are a wonderful, really filling snack. These are actually a fruit, believe it or not. And you can certainly have it in a plain form. You can grill it. You can make a guacamole. I could go on, but it's delicious. And people used to think that fats made you fat, but that's actually not the case. Again, these are very low carb, which I'll show you on a future slide. Hard-boiled eggs, as I mentioned, can be portable, wonderful protein, simple to eat. Who knew I'd be putting dark chocolate on a slide? Most people think that's a no-no food, but dark chocolate is actually very flavorful. It's full of cacao, which is full of antioxidants. And these dark chocolates tend to have less added sugar. Milk chocolate tends to be the one that has more added sugar. So if you're sticking with dark chocolate, a square or two, very flavorful, delicious, might just be enough to take the edge off for your snack. And lastly, sliced veggies I think can be fabulous, especially if you pair them with a delicious dip. So maybe you like a little bit of ranch or cheese, maybe have some healthy fats with some olives there. These are all great choices. Now my tip number 8 takes it a little step further. We can look at snacks or meals with this one, but we want to think about combining protein and fiber with our meals and snacks so that carbohydrates can have some kind of a little companion to slow down the digestion. So we call this a synergistic effect of food. So if you eat carbohydrates alone, your body can break them down a little bit more easily than when you're adding in the healthy fats and proteins, which make your body work a little bit harder. So what this will do is it'll keep you feeling fuller longer. I always notice that if I have an apple alone, I'm usually hungry about an hour later. But if I have an apple with a little bit of peanut butter on it, it usually keeps me full for a few hours. And again, that's because it's gonna, again, slow the digestion down. And instead of having a spike to the blood sugar with a quick carbohydrate or a fast carb that I talked about before, you're gonna have a lesser increase in blood sugar and a longer, more prolonged blood sugar. So this can be anywhere from, you might notice a slight rise 3 to 8 hours after your meal. And that's what we want, because that means that we have longer burning energy. And that's gonna help with our portion control, as well as our weight management when we're not looking for the next meal and we really feel like something has held us for 3 to 4 hours. That's a good rule of thumb. So here's some examples of some really good meal or snack combinations that you can think about. You can get creative and make your own. But certain things, like I mentioned, the apple and peanut butter work nicely together. Thinking about having some cut up veggies with a little bit of cheese. If you're gonna have some steel cut oats in the morning, which again, that's that oatmeal with a really great amount of fiber, think about throwing in some healthy fats with some pumpkin seeds or chopped up walnuts. All of these things really are, up to you. You can get creative, but again, I think if you were to test your blood sugar after some of these combinations versus the carbohydrate alone, you'll see a positive change. So tip number 9, this one may shock some people since this webinar is geared towards diabetics, but I am telling you to choose fruit if you're craving sweets. At times we're all going to have that, we're all human, and I know again a lot of physicians will caution you not to eat a lot of fruit because it has something called fructose in it. And fructose does raise your blood sugar, but with that said, fructose, certainly when it's accompanied by fiber, is going to really be a lot better than any other thing in the sweet tooth category that you're going to pick. Something with added sugar, right? So again, that fiber is the antidote to sugar. It slows down the release of the blood sugar. It has all of those wonderful benefits I talked before with your cholesterol, your gut microbiome. But I would say when you're reaching for fruit, if you want to have the least impact on your blood sugar, you want to choose something called low glycemic fruits. So we're going to refer to low glycemic fruits as things that have the lowest impact on your blood sugar. So this might be berries, kiwi. I'm going to show you more on the next slide here. So you can see I've got a variety of examples. Over on the right-hand side, the little chart has a variety of different types of fruits, and they're in order from the lowest amount of net carbs, actually from the highest amount of net carbs to the lowest. Now, I don't know if any of you really want to chew on a lemon, but a lemon only has 3 grams of net carbs, so very little sugar, with the contrary at the top of the list of watermelon, which is going to have, a lot more sweetness, and it has 11 grams of net carbs. Still not too bad for an entire cup of fruit, right? The avocado is on here towards the bottom, and you can see that while avocado has a lot of carbohydrate in it, 17 grams, it has 13 grams of fiber. So our net carbs left over is only 4 grams. That's pretty fabulous to have a medium avocado and only 4 grams of net carbs, really filling. On the left-hand side, you can see some other fruit examples that I've given you, and you can really see that the berries, again, tend to have the lowest amount of net carbs here, like strawberries. So we are looking at 8.6 grams of net carbs for a serving. Things like your clementines also are wonderful choices. Those are only 7.6 grams of net carbs. I think all fruit really belongs. Just think about the sweeter ones like watermelon, cantaloupe, pineapple, which isn't on here, bananas. Those tend to be a little bit higher, so you just don't want to have as much of a serving. All is going to be better for sweet tooth than having a big bowl of ice cream, unless it's Rebel. All right, on to our final tip. This is tip number 10, and this is where you get to be your own, what I call N of 1, your own guinea pig. You get to experiment on yourself. So oftentimes our physicians have recommended that we check our blood sugar. So I'm hoping that this means that you have a meter and a testing kit at home. If you don't, these are available in most pharmacies, and I think it's really important as you try to figure out how certain foods affect you, that you have some way of testing. Now, there also is something called a CGM, or continuous blood sugar monitor, that your physician may or may not have recommended for you. You can check in to see if it's right for you. These are devices that can be worn on the arm or the abdomen, and they're painless devices, so you really don't feel them. They have a really fine needle. It's about the width of a human hair. And these give you continuous readings throughout the day and the night, as opposed to having to stick your finger each time you want to have a blood sugar result. I think they're absolutely fabulous. Again, they're covered for diabetics under insurance if you're testing at least 4 times a day. If you're not testing 4 times a day, you still can get a prescription for them. And some are pretty economical, like the Freestyle Libre, I will say, is fairly affordable. It can cost anywhere from $20 to $70 a month, and you wear 2 sensors a month, and it tells you some amazing information. So again, check with your physician to see which tool is right for you. So doing the self-study, getting back to our N of 1, what I like you guys to do, whether you're using a basic blood sugar meter or a CGM, is to take a few days and record what you're eating. So trying out some of these foods that we talked about today, and also test your blood sugar before and 90 minutes after meals. That's going to help us see cause and effect. So we're going to see a couple of different trends here. We want to be able to trend out, number one, when you see your best blood sugars, ideally again between 80 and 140, could be 70 and 130. You'll have to kind of check in and see what your physician and yourself have decided for your plan. We want to see when your best blood sugars are happening 90 minutes after a meal. Ask yourself these 4 questions. What did you eat? Log that down. How did you eat? What were the circumstances? Where were you? Was it a sit-down meal? When and where did you eat? And how did you manage your blood sugar around these times? Knowing the answers to these questions helps to start build our own personal plan. Now, same thing on the flip side, when we're not doing so well, we can also learn from that. So let's also think about when we see a high blood sugar, anything over 200, 90 minutes after a meal. And again, your number could be lower, it could be 180. Same 4 questions. What did you eat? How did you eat? When and where did you eat? And again, how did you manage your blood sugar, your diabetes around these times? Noticing even with how did you eat, were there any emotions going on at the time? What influenced you? Were you really hungry? Some of these questions also can be helpful beyond just what the food was. So I would say, as we try to pull out some of these themes, if you're struggling to identify these patterns, I think there's a couple of little supporting apps that I can recommend for you. I think there's 2 particular ones that I think are great. There's one called My Sugar, MySugr, and there's another app, these are both free for Android or iPhone, called OneDrop. If you're, again, using a CGM, like Freestyle Libre or the Dexcom system, both of these devices also have great apps included, and they help you log and trend your numbers. So in the following slide, I'm going to show you what a CGM would show you if you're interested in using one. And if you don't use a CGM, you can still envision this for yourself based on your readings as you trend them throughout the day alongside your eating habits. Again, remember, the ultimate goal is to come up with a list of eating principles that helps you keep your blood sugar in check, gives you enough energy, and is realistic for day-to-day life. So here's our little blood sugar roller coaster and what a typical day might look like. And it's never going to be a straight, flat line. We want to keep something called time and range. So you and your physician can figure out, again, what that looks like, if it's between 70 and 140 or so on. And we're always going to see after meals that our blood sugar is going to raise a little bit, unless we took too much medication or there's another factor going on. And then as our body starts to work with the glucose, we get it into the cells, either with medication, when we start to use it for exercise or other reasons, the curve is going to start to slide back down. So what we really want to see is smaller variability between the highs and the lows. If you're seeing a lot of variability, like over on the right, the blood sugar roller coaster, that really starts to tell us that we need to kind of step back and assess what is causing these extreme spikes and these plunges or energy crashes in between our meals. And notice how you're feeling. I mean, again, in your log, if you're starting to notice that you're feeling hungry, lightheaded, your mood is changing, you're really feeling like you're crashing, that's another indication that we need to go back to the drawing board and see what types of foods or behaviors influence that. But again, we really want to think about leveling out those curves a little bit and analyzing with our logs or apps to help us to figure this out. Now, if you don't want to use any fancy apps or a CGM, you can also accomplish this, as I mentioned, with a meter and finger sticks and just a simple little glucose log. You can find these online if you just Google and put in, blood glucose log. You could make your own, but we want to check, again, the first thing is check your fasting blood glucose in the morning, again, before you have breakfast. That's always a good indicator as well of how well you're managing your diabetes. And then, again, writing down what we've eaten for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then checking our blood sugar 2 hours later and seeing, again, how many grams of carbohydrate do we consume and what was the result in our blood sugar a couple hours after that meal. So the apps that I mentioned, I just threw up a couple of graphics here that might make it easier for you to find them. I think they are fabulous, the One Drop and the My Sugar. If you're a type 1 diabetic, I can say that both of these apps are really great, especially the One Drop, because it allows you to put in your insulin administration information as well. I know a lot of times when we're really trying to make sure that we're calculating the carbs with our insulin, that's a whole other story. Again, the diet tips that I did give you today, I hope are helpful to kind of put this all together, but the real magic is going to be in you trying things out to see how they've affected you. So that's all of my top 10 tips for today. I hope this was helpful. If you do have further questions, you can always reach out to us with the Berkshire Health Group Diabetes Care Program with Coordinator Beth Piantoni. Or you could also, if you need further support, check in with us with Berkshire Medical Center Diabetes Education. We are always available to schedule an appointment to meet with you in person or virtually. And we hope that, again, you're on your way to better blood glucose management. And I thank you for attending today.